Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today our guest is Hugh Milne. Hi Hugh.
Hi Ian.
And Hugh has written a couple of books. They're very different. I'm going to hold them up here. The first one is The Heart of Listening, a visionary approach to craniosacral work. And we're going to talk partly about this book and about his work. And another book which is completely different because Hugh was actually the personal bodyguard for Bhagwan, Shree, Rajneesh, also known as Osho, for many years. And he wrote a book about that called Bhagwan, the God That Failed. We won't feature too heavily on this, but we will include his story with Bhagwan. And he's also actually been featured in a film which has come out in Switzerland, not the UK yet, which the full title is Guru, Bhagwan, His Secretary and His BodyGuard, which I haven't seen yet, but I think it's going to be very interesting. So, Hugh, you've certainly had a varied life, and we're going to basically focus on your journey and what you've learnt through your life and what you've felt and how you've integrated your experiences. And I know that something happened when you were 5 years old, when a teacher in a class said to you, draw a picture, I think it was a man on a hill.
And so I drew the sky coloured blue around the man's figure, but left a gap around the figure because that's what I saw, that people were surrounded by a different nature of field around their body. And the teacher came over and said, no, there's no space around people, colour the blue right in against the man's body. And I thought, oh, I'm not supposed to see that. And that was an eventful day because I think from that moment on until I was about 25, I shut that down. I felt I wasn't supposed to see it.
So you felt at the time, you knew you'd seen something, and did you feel guilty, or did you feel that maybe you'd misread what you'd seen? Do you remember what you felt at the time?
I was a bad boy. I was the bad boy in the family, and so this to me was just another example of you're doing something wrong. So it was very easy for me to accept the criticism or the observation that that doesn't exist. What you're seeing doesn't exist. And my memory, such as it is, of the consciousness of being 5 years old is I'm desperately wanting to fit into the adult world, and adults tell me how things are. So if an adult says that doesn't exist, I say, good, that doesn't exist.
So they must be right.
Yes, yeah, it's their world.
And that's how we are brought up, isn't it, to a large degree, that they're right and what we see is maybe wrong or inappropriate, or even not there, is it, in your case?
Yeah.
So obviously the head somehow was a precursor because you ended up becoming an osteopath and then a craniosacral therapist. And so it was a kind of important part of your early life, the fact the head somehow became a focus.
I remember asking my grandfather, James C. Thompson, when I was probably 10, Granddad, how do we know how high the top of our head is? Because he was an osteopath and learned in such matters. And he had the gentleness to say, well, let's think about that. Let's see if we can figure out how we know where the top of our head is. And at the time, I think it was just a literal question. But as I became interested in the chakra system, I thought, well, maybe I was in some dim, groping way asking my grandfather about the crown chakra. How do we know what's up here?
So both your father and your grandfather worked as osteopaths?
And mother and two uncles. And,
Wow, so it really was in the family.
Yeah.
And you went to Rudolf Steiner's school?
In Scotland.
Yes. And how was that for you?
I went there because the traditional Scottish primary school I was at, Gilsland Park, was a place of, for me, punishment and unhappiness. I was bottom of the class in most subjects and getting caned on my knuckles several times a day for not doing my homework. And my parents basically took me out of that, recognizing that that system didn't work for me, and took me to the Rudolf Steiner School. And it was, on the one hand, a great relief not to need to do rigorous amount of homework anymore, and on the other side of that was eventual arriving at the place where I wouldn't be able to go to university because the structuring of the Steiner School and my own lack of academic prowess meant that I couldn't get the exams for university entrance. And at that point, age 12, I left the Steiner School and went to the local comprehensive school to get my university entrance.
And then you studied to be an osteopath in London when you were in your late teens.
Yeah.
And you'd found your vocation in life somehow, or you felt you found your vocation in life. And you became quite successful quite quickly, didn't you?
Far more quickly than I thought. And the turning point for me was a day in my private practice in Kensington in London when I made £60 in one day. This was 1972. And I'd, until recently, been living on £1 or £2 a week, getting through osteopathic school frugally without a grant. So £60 in one day was a huge amount of money. And my inner ear said, so you earned £60, so what? Did you enjoy that? Do you want to do that for the rest of your life? And the answer was no. I want to know more about the deeper realms of human interaction. I don't just want to earn money.
And what did that mean to you at the time, the deeper realms of human interaction?
I had an experience in a health clinic I worked at of being on night duty and seeing an elderly gentleman walk up the stairs, and I said to the night nurse, "Who's that?" And she said, "That's Mr. Hodges." I said, "Why is he here?" She said, "There's nothing wrong with him. In fact, he's having an affair with Mrs. Williams." And I just noticed him. I didn't know why. I noticed him. And at 4 in the morning, the night nurse woke me up and said, "He's gone, he's gone." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Mr. Hodges is dead." Had a heart attack that night. And I wanted to know, what is this? What am I seeing? It wasn't conscious beyond seeing the man and noticing something that was subcortical, some awareness that something's amiss, enough to ask the night nurse, "Who's that?" And I wanted to understand that more. I didn't feel that there was anyone at the osteopathic college I could ask. I didn't feel I could ask my father, although he very much had that gift. He wouldn't talk about it. And I wanted to find someone who could help me with it, because it disturbed me.
And where were you drawn on that journey practically next?
I felt like a fraud. I felt like I was practicing as an osteopath when something else was knocking at my door wanting to come through, and I kept looking for a different way. And so I became one of Michael Barnett's students in his early encounter groups in London in 1972.
This was the community centre, is
Yes.
that right? Yes.
Actually, it was called Kaleidoscope, and then there was a name change to Community.
Right.
And I was one of Michael's small group of people that were being trained to be encounter group leaders with him. I did psychodrama, I did Gestalt therapy, I touched into Rolfing, and I kept looking for what
So you were immersing yourself in a big adventure, weren't you, there?
Yeah, I wanted an answer.
Yes.
I wanted to know, what is this stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for people that don't know what an encounter group is, just explain briefly how they used to work, the old encounter groups.
Encounter began with the work of Carl Rogers in the early 60s at Esalen Institute. It was inspired by the work of Fritz Perls, the Gestalt therapy pioneer, and it was in essence that let us strip away our social politeness and say how we really feel. If we're sad, let's say we're sad, not what a nice day this is. If we're angry, let's just say we're angry. If we're scared, let's say we're scared. And it used the group field, the presence of up to 30 people sitting in the same room, to confront those members of the group whom you or the group felt were not being authentically themselves.
So it was about being honest, really, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was also something I remember reading in one of your books. You had a very busy day as an osteopath, and you'd done, I think, something like 19 sessions, and you were exhausted. And you had one more session left, and you felt you didn't have the energy to do your normal session.
To slightly correct you, this was the year before, the summer before I went to osteopathic school. My mother had taught me Swedish massage. And this is Kingston Clinic in Scotland, my family's clinic. And yes, there was a schedule of 16 massages a day, 25 minutes each, 5 minutes for the changeover. And the last patient came in, a man, and took off all his clothes, as people did in those days, and lay down on the table. And I leant back against this mahogany door, exhausted, and said to myself, I can't do this. I can't do another rub-a-dub-dub Swedish massage. And I didn't know what to do, and I heard the words in my inner ear, hold his feet. And me, conscious me, ego, central ego, said, well, my mother didn't teach me how to do that. I can't do that. Touch his feet. Well, no, I can't touch his feet. Touch his feet. And at the third time being told to do this, I thought, well, I can't do what I would normally do, so I'll touch his feet. And after I held the man's feet for 5 minutes, quite still, just holding his feet, I heard the instruction, now hold his sacrum. So I went to hold his sacrum, and so the session unfolded. And at the end of the 25 minutes, the distinguished gentleman got up and said, what was that? And I didn't know what it was. So in my insecurity, I just said, that's what I always do. And he said, well, I've been coming to this clinic 30 years, and that was the best session I've ever had. And I was shaken by it. I didn't understand it. I knew if you heard voices, you were probably schizophrenic. So I didn't discuss it with my mother or my father. But it left a deep impression on me. This was something I'd never experienced. I was 19 years old. It was a drug-free state of altered consciousness that came about through exhaustion. And it was one of the reasons that I ended up in India 6 years later. What is this stuff?
Yeah, but it was another example in a way of following your truth. You didn't understand what the truth was, but you followed it.
Reluctantly.
Yeah.
Which has always been my way.
Yeah. So you then went on to experiment with meditation, and you were quite resistant there, I think, to start with. You saw it as a little bit too mystical, is that right?
I associated it with old ladies with crystal balls and a kind of opaque, out-of-the-body mysticism that threatened me. I wanted something more down to earth and based in mechanics, such as much of osteopathy is. I wanted something more grounded. And true to several other decision points in my life, it was only manifested through a series of outside events. The health clinic that I worked at closed down unexpectedly, and suddenly I was without a job 4 days a week. And the very next day, I hear about this meditation course led by Veena, who's just come from Bombay, and who's a sannyasi of this person, Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, whose locket she's wearing round her mala in front of her heart. I think the truth about my life journey is that I've been reluctant, if not cowardly, to make real changes, and if I hadn't lost my highly lucrative health clinic job, and if the meditation course hadn't been free, I wouldn't have done it. And I would probably have remained on the periphery of at least the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh movement for some time. As it was free. It started the next morning. My friend Bill said, we'll do it together. So I thought, why are you resisting? Do it.
And so you, within a few weeks or a few months, you actually felt you needed to go to Bombay to meet this man?
Well, so the next morning was the first of 10 days of dynamic meditation. And on the last day, Bill said, let's go to India. And so I said, if you'll go, I'll go. And we booked tickets on Egypt Air and for several weeks hence. And the day before we were due to fly to Bombay, Bill said, I've changed my mind, I'm going to New York instead. And if I'd had to book the ticket on my own, I wouldn't have done it. I'd never left the UK before except for 3 short visits to France, and the concept of going to India was overwhelming to me. But going with my friend Bill was fine. But as it was, Bill went to New York to do the Eureka training, instead, and I went to India on my own.
And you got there, and you went to see Bhagwan. And what was your first impression when you met him?
I went to 2 evening lectures first, and I was quite touched by how delicate and poised he was, how effortless and smooth his speaking voice, although he was speaking in Hindi. And then I had my first darshan with him. In those days there were one-on-one darshans in his room, and I was completely transformed by the experience of being in his presence. And I took sannyas, was given a new name.
But what does that mean? Completely transformed by being in his presence. What does that actually mean?
It was the first time in my life I met someone who didn't live in the normal world, who had transited the normal world to go to a different place. It's the Shaktipat, it's the contact high, it's sitting in the presence of someone who has a different consciousness.
But what effect did that have on you?
I felt that I'd met my father, my real father. I felt expanded and yet grounded. Cognitively, I said, he's the wisest man I've ever met in my life. I'd met 2 or 3 really authentic teachers at school. And here was someone who I felt was the next great teacher for me. So part of it was, in Jungian terms, a transference to a father figure. Part of it was being inducted into his state of consciousness, an enlightened state of consciousness. Part of it was a tremendous impact on my heart. I'd never met anyone remotely like him.
And when you say impact on your heart, what did that feel like?
It feels like being in love with the world, with myself, with him. It's like the experience of being in love. It's like the experience pregnant women have in the 3rd trimester of going to the checkout line in the supermarket and falling in love with the guy who takes their money. It's like being in love with everybody. And I had grown up in post-war Britain with food rationing, being the bad boy in the family, being terrible at school, with a lot of aggression and anger at school, fights and bullying and rugby, and a lot of really grey, hard, difficult post-war times. And suddenly I'm in India in the presence of someone who's clear, who's just, in a way, all heart. I don't know, can I say it in any other way, how different that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then practically you were doing the dynamic meditation on the beach, I think,
Yes,
every
5
morning.
o'clock in the morning, Chapati
Yes.
Beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, panting, hooting, yeah.
Yeah.
With stray dogs threatening to bite your calves. And
Yeah. It's a completely different way of life.
Yeah.
And your relationship with Bhagwan, to start with, did you get close to him personally, or did that come later?
I think the crucial event was darshan in Mount Abu, a hill station in Rajasthan. We're on the, I don't remember, 4th or 5th day of my 2nd meditation camp. He said, you have to go to this farm with 35 other people. And I looked at him and said, I don't want to go. And something clicked into place. My grandmother had a stroke when I was 16. And my mother said, go and sit with your grandmother. I said, I don't want to sit with my grandmother. I want to ride my motorbike in the mountains. She said, go and sit with your grandmother. I said, what am I going to do for 20 minutes? She can't talk. She'd lost her speech as a result of the stroke. And my mother just insisted, sit with your grandmother. And in that moment, sitting beside Bhagwan, that same thing clicked in of listening to someone deeper than what they're saying. And I heard Bhagwan saying, you have to go to the farm. Like, you have to go to the fucking farm. Yeah. And I looked at him and said, but I do have to go to the farm, don't I? And he just made a little jolt like that, looked at me and said, yes, good, you have to go. And I had the sense that he knew I was reading his mind because he was so good at reading other people's minds. And I think that was the beginning of our personal connection. And as a result of that, I think he was comfortable with my being his bodyguard for 7 years, because we had an intuitive ability to communicate where a lot of the time he didn't need to tell me to do what he needed done. I just sensed it and went to do it. And he would never appreciate that I'd done that. He would only criticize me when I didn't get it.
So keeping in sequence, you went to the farm which was called Kailash, and it was very hot and not a great place to be. Yet something happened for you there, didn't it? It's something you talk about in the God That Failed. You talked about you actually did reconnect with this intuitive feeling you had when you were 5 years old.
Yes, yeah. I think Bhagwan's perhaps greatest genius was perceiving people's essence and sensing what they needed to do to return to deep connection with their essence. And in my case, he said, go to the farm, Kailash, and for 3 months be in mauna, be in silence. And that's what I did on the farm. I only lasted 2 months there before I left of my own accord. But by the end of the 2 months, it really worked for me. And I arrived at that point of seeing auras again, of sensing what people would say before they said anything.
Yeah, so that was really almost coming back to something you had and you'd lost and you rediscovered.
Yeah.
And you met a tiger there, didn't you? Or got close to a tiger.
Yeah.
That must have been quite something.
In the Boy Scouts in Scotland, we sometimes were given the task of walking at night. Actually, we did that also at the Rudolf Steiner School. At midsummer, we walked the whole night in the Pentland Hills in Scotland. And in the Boy Scouts, we'd have a fence and a field, and it was virtually pitch dark, occasionally some starlight. And was there a bull in the field? And we were young teenagers, and so it was a bit of a sense of a risky adventure. Hop over the fence and you'll find out the hard way if there was a bull. Well, I'm at Kailash. It's the middle of a jungle clearing, and there are tigers in the jungle. And I'm walking at night, and suddenly it's quiet. And there's no crickets, there's no cicadas, and I sense something's in front of me. And I think, well, it can't be a dog because the villagers put the dogs away at night. It can't be a cow because they tether the cows because of the tigers. And I think, well, it can't be a tiger, you dramatist. Why would it be a tiger? And I think, well, there's something there. And so I clap my hands loudly, and in front of me, very close by, there's a and a scuffling of gravel, and I think, it was a fucking tiger. It was a tiger. Recently in The Economist, they did an article on the tigers and the plight of the tigers, and the narrator said, no one ever forgets their first meeting with a tiger. And I absolutely agree with her. It's a very powerful field. Yeah.
So you got back from Kailash, and was it then that Bhagwan and the ashram moved to Pune, or was that a bit later?
During the time that I left Kailash, the whole Bombay scene moved to Pune. So by the time I got back to Bombay, no one was there. I hadn't heard they'd moved to Pune. And went to Pune, had decided that I wasn't going to see Bhagwan again. I was just going to go home, but he had one of those moments of, I think, genius where he enticed me back, and 9 months later I was his bodyguard.
But Hugh, what from your side was pulling you? You talk about his genius, but was it a quest for enlightenment or freedom? What was going on in you in terms of your journey?
I've never felt that I was of the caliber to become enlightened. I have this deep sense of myself as the bad boy. So it was never a question of going to India to become enlightened. Although the idea was attractive, I just didn't feel it was practical. I went to see Bhagwan because I wanted to understand these weird things that were happening to me. I think part of the reason I stayed was because I had a personal connection that was very meaningful to me, a transference to a father figure, a transference to someone who manifested this wonderful feeling of heart chakra openness. And because to me he patently, obviously, could do the kinds of things that I only occasionally got a glimpse of. And it's important in my personal journey that he understood I was in no way ambitious. There were many people more gifted than myself as meditators or therapists whom Bhagwan wouldn't let basically near him because they were ambitious for his throne. And he knew absolutely, unquestionably, I was not ambitious for his throne. So that was part of it as well.
Yeah. So you were kind of following and not actually, you didn't really have a goal as such. You were just following what was there, and then the next stage would appear. Am I right in how I describe it?
Today at age 62, it's hard for me to really remember what it was like to be 25 and lost.
Yeah.
And full of sex hormones and longing and financially successful, but spiritually lost.
Yes.
With no real experience of meditation. Well, by 1976 I had some personal experiences of stillness and depth, but basically they were just words. And so why was I there? Because I was lost, because I was looking for answers, because the Western world, being successful in Kensington, wasn't enough for me.
So you felt a kind of emptiness maybe from the Western world?
Yeah, a depression and emptiness that I've been through 4 years of osteopathic college, and I'm successful long before I thought I would ever be. So what?
Yeah.
Where's the rest?
Yeah.
Where's real meaning?
So tell me more about, you were talking earlier about this intuitive relationship you had with Bhagwan, in terms of being able to find the danger that may be there.
In a way, it's similar to the seeing of auras, the perception of the field around people's bodies, or animals' bodies for that matter. And my karate teacher, Satchidananda, said, you never know what will happen in a fight. Doesn't matter how well trained you are, you never know the outcome of a fight. And recognizing the truth of that, I realized that the essence of my job as bodyguard was to not let anyone in front of him who might be of danger to him. That the true work of a bodyguard is half an hour before screening out anyone who might be of possible danger. And so I would stand back from the audience, stand back from people filtering into his darshan line, and notice anyone whose field I felt was out. And to me, I don't see colors in the aura. I just begin to look at people. And by the third time I've looked at someone, I recognize, well, why am I looking at that person? Let me go talk to them. And so I would go up and ask them an innocent sounding question. How are you doing today? And start and sometimes provoke them and push them a bit and just see if they were in a calm state or not. And if they were, I would back off. And if not, I would escort them out.
And when you escorted them out, did they normally go easily, or was it sometimes a struggle?
2 or 3 times a year it became a fight.
Yeah.
And I had 1 or 2 guards to back me up some of the time, and some of the time it was a messy street fight with the robe being torn off my back. But luckily that was a sufficiently rigorous vetting process between myself and the ladies that were also involved in that process that I never had a fight right in front of Bhagwan. It was always 100 feet away and half an hour before.
You talk in the God That Failed book about surrender. And I know you started to question, this was a bit later, you started to question what surrender meant to you and if you really practically needed to do what you were asked to do. At that stage, were you still automatically in a state of connection with Bhagwan, that the question of whether you needed to surrender came up?
There were times in Pune when I was in a state of ecstatic happiness, that this was the perfect place and this was the journey and this was our crusade and it was magical and powerful and I had no questions about my journey and my connection to Bhagwan. There were more times where I thought, what am I doing here? My health and my life is in jeopardy. If I didn't have this great job going to darshan every night, I'd be out of here. So initially there was a tremendous emphasis on surrender. The word surrender was used extensively, and it caused me to go back to London twice before I finally, on my third visit, stayed for 7 years. And the use of the word surrender, in my experience of it, metamorphosized into the work. It was no longer you have to surrender, it was you have to work. And the work pretty quickly by 1977 became 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day.
This is when the ashram moved to Oregon.
No, this is still in
Still
Pune.
in Pune, yeah.
We moved to Oregon in 1981.
Okay, yeah. I was a sannyasin, as you know. I wasn't at all involved at Pune, but I did visit Oregon 3 times. So I understood the hours that you worked there. They were very long hours, and it was basically 7 days a week.
Yeah, on a bulldozer.
And that was physically grueling, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And very loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're 6 feet away from a exhaust stack of a 7-liter diesel engine with no silencer.
Yeah.
So it was grueling. No suspension, minus 10 Celsius for 4 months of the winter.
The thing I remember from my visits was this incredible energy. And you had to really you can't really describe it, you had to be there to experience it. And living that in that energy field must have felt very supportive a lot of the time.
Yes, yeah. Energy field is a good word. I like the term group soul, that when a number of people come together with the same purpose, especially a higher purpose such as a spiritual journey, it helps manifest a group soul. And the group soul in Rajneesh Puram and the community in Oregon was extraordinary. And I think it sustained the initial growth of the commune, and also at a tipping point around 1984 began the destruction of the commune when people began to leave. When the next World Festival a year later actually had 3,000 people less attending it than the one before.
Yeah. So you left actually twice, didn't you? The first time you left, you found it very difficult going back in the world, and you ended up coming back after, I think, a few weeks or a few months.
Yes, yeah.
So how was it, how did you feel to leave? Here you were leaving your master, who'd been the bodyguard for 7 years and very close friends, and you go out into a very different society.
I don't remember the name of it, but one of Sean Connery's early movies, he's a prisoner for safecracking, and he gets out of prison the same time as the 65-year-old guy. And the 65-year-old guy and Sean Connery and a couple of the other ex-convicts are in a shopping mall, and the 65-year-old guy doesn't know what to do. He's been in prison for 20 years, and there's ATM machines, and there's banks without grills, and he doesn't know how to function. I felt like Rip Van Winkle. I felt like 5 years old. My entire life for 9.5 years had been in the commune, and I couldn't manage. I was institutionalized. I'd become institutionalized.
Yes, yeah.
And so I went back and thought, well, I'll give this one more try. I don't like what's going on here, but maybe it's me that's wrong. And I went back in, I think that was about July or August of 1982, and very quickly my inner ear said, your heart isn't in this. Your heart isn't in this. And my pattern, my lifelong pattern, as we've touched on, has been to delay things and put off difficult decisions. And so it was not till November that I finally left, with the resolution that I can't come back. This does not work, and I can't do it again.
Yes.
I have to leave for good.
And that was very, very difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You want to just talk us through briefly how you were? I think you were very depressed.
I was, initially I had a 6-month exhilaration that I'm free, and had a wonderful time for 10 years, and it became weird and strange, and one of my best friends died, and I was given these strange jobs to do, like harassing and photographing the retired people of Antelope, Oregon, a number of other events like that, including being asked to photograph Bhagwan while he was on nitrous oxide. And the collective experience was of breaking my heart, causing me to leave, feeling my heart isn't in it. And after 6 months of, in a way, being on a high from leaving and feeling that I'd made the right decision, I again became lost, and that same quality of having been institutionalized floored me. And I questioned whether I'd made the right decision at that point, became depressed, recognized I wasn't taking good care of myself, wasn't earning money, saw a psychiatrist for some sessions, and he ended up saying, "I don't know what's wrong with you. I think you should go back to that ranch in Oregon." And I thought, "You're no help to me at all. I can't go back there." And in the end, I asked the psychiatrist, I said, "I want to go to a psychiatric hospital. I can't manage this. I need to be taken care of." And he wasn't quite sure to make of it, but he wrote me a note to go to the psychiatric hospital. And when I was admitted, the medical staff looked at my arms for needle marks. Was I a heroin user? And they couldn't find any, and they couldn't understand why I was there. And when I was admitted, I smiled to myself, a big smile of relief, and I said to myself, "Now they won't kill me."
Huh.
And whether that is factually true or not, it certainly could have been, because they were actively planning to kill people. The doctor I worked with in the health center, they tried to kill him. They tried to kill the Attorney General of Oregon. That was my intuitive sense of, they can write me off because he's crazy, he's in a psychiatric hospital, he's no longer a danger, we don't need to kill him.
And how did you get through that? You went into the psychiatric hospital, and what was the doorway for you to get back to function in the world?
It was human contact.
Human
we
contact.
We had an art class each day, or probably 5 days a week, and opposite me sat a young West Indian woman who was about my age. I was then 34, 35, and she said, "Are you in for section?" And I said, "What section?" He said, "Oh, it's the law that says if you do something crazy, the police put you in here." And I said, "No, I wanted to come in here." She said, "You wanted to come in here?" I said, "Yes." And I said, "How did you get in here?" She said, "My boyfriend jilted me." And it was 2 in the morning, and we were in Bayswater, and it was a back alley, and there were all these garages with glass windows in the doors, and I went down the street and I punched out all the glass windows and I lacerated my forearms. And when the police arrested me, they reckoned they should section me and put me in here. And she became my buddy. And she was, it was human contact. It was, yes, I've been through a heartbreaking change, and these things happen, and now let's get well and go out there and work again.
Yeah.
So after 6 weeks, I was back out working again. That was the transformative relationship.
Yes.
The psychiatrist in there looked at me and thought,
He couldn't work you
"No,
out."
I mean, you've been to India for 10 years? Yeah.
And the ironical thing was, I know that you had a lot of negative feedback from Bhagwan, the people around him, and then you had a letter at one point saying that you were a bodhisattva and you were destined to become enlightened in this lifetime. That must have been a surprise to you when that arrived.
I think it's always been a tussle between my admiration and appreciation for Bhagwan, for the things he did give me and the things he did teach me, and my horror at the callousness of some of his actions, such as my friend Ambara, whose canoe capsized, and we were forbidden after 8 hours for looking, we were forbidden to look for him any further. And so there was a certain, in my judgment of it, a certain callous disregard for human life. And so I had these 2 streams, one appreciative and one very wary. And immediately I decided to leave in November '82. I was pronounced to be the Judas. It was said that because I had divulged all the data about Bhagwan's immigration case, he would have to leave America. I did no such thing. The ranch's lawyer was with me through the whole immigration interview. So I had experienced, if you like, a two-edged sword. And the fact that this announcement of my being a bodhisattva and being given 2 honorary degrees by his university arrived while I was in hospital with a broken pelvis after a motorcycle accident. It just felt like a opportunism that he wanted to entice me back at a time when my defenses may be down. And sure enough, 6 months later, he announced the whole thing was a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I'd really like to talk about your book, The Heart of Listening, which I've only glanced at part of it, I must admit. I haven't read the whole book. But some fascinating things in there, and I think it's really important we covered your story first, because it gives a background into how you got to this place and how, in fact, everything started at 5 years old and then it got lost and rediscovered. And it's been a very rich journey for you to rediscover that. So what, in essence, is the heart of listening?
I think it's what I did with my grandmother. It's sitting with someone and sensing, A, who's here, who's really here, B, what troubles them, C, what do they need, and D, how can I help? These are the 4 aspects, really, of a visionary. So it's an aspect of archaic shamanism. That is not at all new. It's ancient healing tradition, where you don't use drugs, you don't use medical intervention, you don't use physical therapy exercises. You really try to perceive who's here and what troubles them. And in the craniosacral model in which I stand and which I teach, that uses a series of hands-on contacts, typically to the cranium and the spine and the sacrum, to help bring someone back to their stillness, their silence, their deep connection to their own center. The concept being that when they lose that, sooner or later they may develop symptoms or depression or lethargy.
Okay, so don't we all lose contact to our center in one way or another?
We have to, yeah.
So it's really about rediscovery or recontact with our center. And how in life does the ordinary person do that? I know you're doing this specifically with a kind of not really a physical work as such, but you are gently touching people. But what would be your advice to people that feel they have lost their center, the direction and where they should look to help refine this center?
First, a line from the Bible, be still and know that in my experience nothing is more powerful than stillness, by which I mean sitting meditation, sitting perfectly still. John Lennon, in his genius, said, the truth is only one deep breath away. And so, A, be still and know. B, take a deep breath. Be honest with yourself, like the Encounter Group ethos. How does the ordinary person manifest that? Through human contact, through reaching a breaking point in their life where, through exhaustion or desperation, something opens. Do you remember the story in Paul McCartney's life when he's with the Beatles, and as Ringo said of themselves, we were just buskers. None of us could even read music. And there's Paul, he's, I don't know, let's say 23 years of age, and wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, women at his feet, houses, fast cars, and he wakes up. I'll go to poetic license now because I don't know the exact details, but he wakes up at 3 in the morning, not knowing what he's doing in this woman's apartment, and feels completely lost, without any bearings at all, And he remembers his dead mother. Paul's mother died when he was a teenager, saying, Paul, when you don't know what to do, ask the Mother Mary. And Paul does. And you know the resulting song. When you find yourself in times of trouble, Mother Mary, come to me. And 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
poetic license, maybe it was 5, I don't know, Mother Mary came to Paul
Yes.
and changed his life.
Yeah.
And my stepfather used to swear and cuss. And one day, the Virgin Mary came to him. And you might say, well, that's crazy, Virgin Mary. I mean, he's hallucinating. But his experience was, one day, as he was swearing, the Virgin Mary came and said, don't swear, it offends God. And he didn't swear ever after. And as I know people, as a therapist working with people for many years, every human being has some experience like that.
Mm. So the key words are truth, intuition, I guess to some extent courage, because you've got to maybe take action.
I don't believe in
No.
courage.
Okay.
No. Aung San Suu Kyi, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995, someone said to her, Aung San Suu Kyi, you're so courageous. She said, no, I'm an ordinary woman.
Mm.
Brave women are ordinary women who go on. Saints are sinners who go on trying. We can only hope our fears do not dictate what we do. It was Paul Lowe who said to me many years ago, people only change when they're desperate or they're in love. And I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, or highly inspired somehow.
Yeah, that would count. Yeah, good. Yeah.
When you, I'm quite intrigued. As I say, I read part of your Heart of Listening book, and it seems that when you touch somebody's body, you pick up information, and you pick up a lot of information, and it's like, it seems that you used the word hologram, and it's like one part of the body is a hologram of the rest of the body. Can you explain that a little bit more in simple terms?
Well, we have a paradigm in the West that there's the body and there's the spirit, perhaps also the soul, and that the three are separate. In Dzogchen cosmology and Tibetan cosmology, they say the moment of conception is accompanied by a flash of bliss that denotes the formation of the heart chakra. That's English language and perhaps also Tibetan language, but the truth is, it's one thing. The moment of conception is a flash of bliss, which is the formation of the heart chakra. So the human energy field is a field of information and intelligence. It's physical, the formation of the heart. It's energetic, a flash of bliss. And in sitting with someone or touching someone, there are ways to tap into that field of information and intelligence. And craniosacral is one model of doing that.
And I know from sessions that I've had over the years, it's such a gentle process, isn't it? You seem to hardly do anything, and yet the outcome can be quite dramatic.
This is the Eastern concept that the greatest of change comes from the most subtle of movement. Yeah. That the most powerful is actually the most gentle. Yeah.
So where do you see your life going now? Do you have any clues about how it unfolds next?
I've basically gone from not knowing who I was to then having the identity of a therapist to then, with great reluctance, becoming a craniosacral teacher. And in the last 2 years, I've begun teaching classes just in visionary work, no longer saying craniosacral. And this is taking off, and I'm simply saying yes to it.
So when you say visionary work, what do you actually mean by that?
I use the definition from the work of Angeles Arian, who's actually a Basque woman living in California, who says a visionary is someone who can do 4 things, and 4 things equally well. Perceive the physiological parts of their client, Second, perceive their physiological entirety. Third, perceive their process, using the word process in a Jungian sense, meaning the collective of their aspirations, their personal psychology, their ego structure, their family constellation background. And fourth, have the same critical and truthful awareness of their own process, their own dreams, aspirations, limitations, egoic structure, constellation background, and can hold all four as equal in importance and do all four equally well. So that's a long-winded definition. My shorter definition is the purpose of the work is to help create an open heart, a clear head, and a free body. And when you say that to people, they go, okay, I'll try one session.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a great place to finish.
Okay.
I appreciate you coming in, Hugh.
Yeah.
I'm just going to show people again your diverse books here. The one we've just been talking about here, The Heart of Listening, which is definitely in print. The God That Failed, which was Hugh's adventures with Bhagwan, which you can get secondhand. I'm not sure it's in print now. And the film, Guru, which I mentioned earlier, which I haven't seen
You're
yet.
upside down, Ian.
I'm upside down. That's how life is at times.
Yes, it is.
Upside down.
Yeah.
And which I think is going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
So thanks again, Hugh.
Thank you, Ian. It's been fun. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for watching Conscious TV. And I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.